So if you could put your hands together for David McNulty, thank you. David, fantastic. Thanks so much for spending time with us. You're only with us a short time. You've got to speak in Parliament at what time?
I'm speaking in the House of Commons at 1 o'clock. Not in the actual chamber. That'll be Mr. Osborne, but I'm speaking at a parliamentary reception later.
Right, and it's the big budget hand down now today, is it?
Yes, a lot of it's been trailed, but I think we'll still get some surprises later today.
Right.
I think surprises, shocks, it depends which way you read it.
Right. Tell us something about your background, and you've been in public service all your life?
Well, can I first say that I hope people will be gentle. I'm actually quite scared at the moment. Two reasons. Normally, when I come on to speak, all that's happened is that you've had someone stand up and said there's no fire alarm planned if you need the toilets to that way. So when I come on, it's quite exciting, but I'm following the band today. And I think the other thing is, if you get a round of applause before you've even done anything, you just feel it can only kind of go downhill. So I'll be listening to the clapometer very carefully at the end of it. I trained as a teacher, so but a post-16 teacher. So my professional background is that I wanted to work with young people, 16 to 19, and then adults. And so my absolute specialism is adult education. Then round about 1998, Blackburn. This is complicated, but Blackburn was part of Lancashire. And then it was allowed to separate and become its own unitary council. So it did everything. And at that stage, they needed someone to come and help set up their education department. And I went in as the most junior, lowest paid manager in the place. And I came home at the end of the first day, and this will sound boastful, but bear with me. And my wife said to me, what was it like? I said, it's really weird, but I think if I put my mind to it, I could end up running that place. And, well, cut a long story short, within a few years I was a director, and then I was made a chief exec. And they've kind of had me trailing around the country to places that weren't doing very well to see if we could help them improve. So I worked in Walsall, which was officially the worst council in the country, when I went to work there. Shall I tell that story?
Just tell what you like.
Yeah. Well, at the time, this is true, the Audit Commission used to rate councils, and you got 2 scores on a scale of 1 to 4. And 1 was bad and 4 was good. You got a score for how well you were doing, and you got a score for your ability to improve. And then every council in the country, 360 of them, were ranked. So at the top were the 4 4s, then it went the 4 3s, then the 3 3s. Then it came all the way down to the 1 1s. And then there was a gap, some white space, and then it was Walsall. No score. We weren't even good enough to get a 0. And I remember we had a session like this with some of the community groups, and we were trying to work out a slogan for Walsall moving forward. And the slogan that got the most votes was, Walsall, not as bad as you think it is. I did a couple of years in Walsall, and I've got to be careful, because sometimes when I tell that story, there's people who don't quite hear it, say, what was he doing in Walsall? But it's Walsall in the Midlands, right? And then I went to Trafford, yeah. And then I got a call in 2009. It was literally a call, and the person at the time said to me, we're trying to recruit somebody for a top role in government. I said, oh, what's that? And am I being filmed? I'm not going to be able to deny I've said this later, am I? It doesn't matter. And honestly, the person said to me, Boris Johnson is looking for a chief of staff, and he'd like you to apply. So after spending about 30 seconds laughing and being amused myself, I said, no, thank you. Have you got anything else? And they said, well, Surrey. And I said the immortal words, well, what does Surrey do? And 5 weeks later, I was the chief exec there and been there 6.5 years. So, and still asking myself the question, what is it we actually do and why do we do it and how could we do it better? Was that quite a long answer, Roger?
No, it's a great answer.
Okay.
It's a large council, one of the largest, I think, is it?
Yeah, depending who's asking and how you count it, it's the fourth or fifth largest in the country. And just to give a sense of the scale, we're responsible for services to over 1.1 million people. Each year we spend on behalf of those communities £1.7 billion. And if we count school staff as well, we've got 26,000 people working. If I just count the people who aren't in schools who do things, the other services we do, I've got around about 11,000 staff that I'm responsible for.
Wow, okay. That keeps you awake at night?
I do actually sleep reasonably well, but there are plenty of things I worry about. I think that without being too serious, well, no, I will be too serious. I think the thing that worries me most at the moment is and I think there was a programme last night, which some of you may have watched, it's the sheer degree of evil there is in terms of the predatory threat to children in our society, which is probably something we're all coming to terms with in terms of the extent and the scale and the intensity and the reality of the lives which some children in our country have to cope with, and the way in which we've not really as a set of communities responded to those children in ways that were proper for quite a long time. And the challenge of getting that right now, I think, is huge for all of us, and it's a particular responsibility for councils working with our colleagues in the police forces to try and make sure that we safeguard children. But it's the scale of the threat to them is just way beyond anything any of us probably thought was real, even as recently as a couple of years ago. And that's something that does genuinely keep me awake at the moment. And as we speak, I was just doing a call before I came in. As we speak, we've got, I can't go into too much detail, but we've got a young person whose behaviour is so extreme that we can't find a safe place to keep them. And the places that are established to look after young people, children in those circumstances, the behaviour of this young person, this child, is too extreme even for them. And therefore we've got an arrangement which we've had for 4 days now, where we've got a whole group of people just 24 hours a day looking after this child, but it's not a tenable, it's not a sustainable way of doing it, but we don't know what else to do at the moment. And that's just a huge worry, and we won't be the only council that's got that kind of challenge. There's a national shortage of places for children with mental health needs. So if you've got children with, they do it in tiers, tier 1 to 4. If you've got the highest need, your chances of finding a bed at any one point are pretty minimal. And if you get a child with those needs, you could be ringing all around the country, trying desperately to find someone who can respond to that child's needs. And we've got people doing that with a child at the moment. I don't know what the outcome of that will be. We've been trying to find a suitable place for this child for 5 days so far, and we don't feel any closer, and that's genuinely a worry.
Okay. Well, thank goodness your budgets aren't being cut at all or anything like that. Because that's the other reality with the increasing need, elderly need and social care needs. You're having to face phenomenal cuts.
Cuts is a tricky way of thinking about it, because in some ways, if people look at council budgets, this will be the tricky bit, it will look as though we're spending more. And the reason is that it's the demand that's the real issue. So the budget we're spending, if we'd have had that budget in 2009 to deal with the number of people we were dealing with in 2009, we'd have been quite okay, I think. it's this phenomenal growth at both ends of the spectrum. So if you think about a council, typically we spend most of our money on older people and on children. And in Surrey, we've got a massive increase in the number of children in the county. So if I give you just one statistic, and I don't normally like percentages, but I'll give you one. When I arrived in 2009, we were providing an additional 400 school places in each year. So just quite a steady number of additional school places. Last year, we had to provide 4,000, 10 times as many. And it's just been going up and up. Now, I'm just going to check whether I've got a really alert audience. At the moment, we're building primary places. So we built 4,000 primary places, 3,000 a year. We'll be building 13,000 additional primary places over 5 years. What will happen in 5 years' time? Don't all shout out. But yes, we'll be building secondary school places. So even if the birth rate stopped now, we'd still have another decade of trying to get the right number of places. The government provides us with some money for those places, but for the most part, the duty's on us, and if we don't get enough money from the government, we have to find a way of funding those school places. Effectively, I borrowed the money on behalf of the community, and we'll pay it back over 40 years. The cost of borrowing that money is equivalent to £15 million a year extra that I will have to spend just to provide those school places. And so it's the demand pressures. The number of over 85s is massively increasing in our community. Again, I don't want people to shout out the answer because I haven't got a prize if you get it right, other than obviously my undying admiration. I got a figure the other day which absolutely astonished me, which is I just asked how many people over the age of 100 lived in Surrey. And I didn't know what I expected the answer to be, but the answer was something that surprised me. We've got 400 people over the age of 100 living there. We've got massive thousands of people over the age of 85. And these are, for the most part, these people look after themselves, but there's a significant group of those people who will need support from us as an organisation. There's a significant proportion of those people who will acquire, in either mild or more severe forms, dementia. And we're just not geared up as a society to respond to the needs of people with dementia. So what we end up doing is expecting the council to somehow deal with that, when in fact what we've really got to do is to change the way our community is organised. So we've got a piece of work at the moment, we're calling it Dementia-Friendly Surrey. You shouldn't need paid-for workers to do all the responsiveness to people with dementia. If we got ourselves organised as communities and neighbourhoods more effectively and made them friendly in that sense, then people with dementia could still live happy, connected lives in our communities. Over 85s, there are health needs, but the biggest need for people over 85 is that they're socially isolated. It's loneliness. And we've got ourselves organised in ways in which, rather than as a community responding to loneliness, we pay a council tax and then the council provides a paid-for service. But that typically would be somebody popping in for 15 minutes at a time, 4 times a day. If there are genuine needs that need to be met in that way, fine. But for the most part, what people need is company support, engagement, connection with their community. And then we could focus the resources that are under pressure on where the need is greatest, where you genuinely need professional intervention, not where we're just substituting for the fact that our communities aren't particularly friendly places sometimes.
So what's your vision for how society should operate?
Well, I have to be honest, and I don't want to be rude. It hadn't ever occurred to me that Chorleywood and Watford would be a kind of prefiguration of heaven. And so I'm just teasing ever so slightly. I don't know. I'm quite simplistic about these things. I believe in fairness, really, and it's just some things just don't seem particularly fair in the way we're organised. And I'm particularly unhappy in my own mind with the fact that people's whole life chances can be determined in so many ways at the point of birth, depending on where they're born, who they're born to. You'll remember the famous comment where somebody said, what should you do to get a good education? And they said, choose your parents carefully. And we can't really. On the way here, walking through Surrey High Street, I walked past 7, and you might say to me, why did I walk past? But then you wanted me to get here. I walked past 7 rough sleepers on Surrey High Street, and that's a number that 7 more than was there a year ago. There's food banks. Hazelmere in Surrey is one of the richest, it's one of the richest parts of the planet, to be perfectly honest. It's an incredibly privileged place. Hazelmere's got a food bank. Hazelmere's got a food bank connected with 40 outlets, and the food bank is supporting hundreds of families in one of the richest places in England by far, actually one of the richest places on the planet. This doesn't feel instinctively comfortable to me that we've organised ourselves in a way where we've got rough sleepers, we've got homelessness, we've got people who need the support of food banks. It doesn't feel to me that that's the sort of society that I want to be part of. So you're trying to respond to that. I think councils are part of that response. I certainly think faith communities are part of that response. There's just something about, I suppose, it's a long answer, isn't it? Am I rambling?
No, you're not. That's great.
Okay. I suppose the single biggest quality that I'd look for is this notion of empathy, which is, could we put ourselves in that other person's shoes? And if that was happening to us, would we think it was fair? And if we do, fine. But if we wouldn't want it to happen to us, why is it that we allow it to happen to others? It's what I keep coming back to. And that's what kind of drives me in my response to the people we work with. And I guess, again, being simplistic, when you see vulnerable people, there's kind of 2 basic reactions there's 3 actually. There's 3 basic reactions. One is that you can see that as an opportunity to exploit someone, and there are plenty of people who do that. One is you can just pretend you didn't see it, and one is that you can see it as a duty or responsibility to go and help them. And the society that I would like is one where the vast majority of us saw vulnerability as something we should respond to, something we should go and help, something that we took a responsibility, a sense of duty and service towards, not as something we ignored or used to our advantage.
Wonderful, thank you. Folk here are leaders of churches and also churches that are organising themselves together in effective ways. I remember I was very struck by a comment you said to me a few years ago when I was taking around churches explaining what they were doing, and your first part of the sentence was really encouraging to me because you said it was very laudable and impressive what churches were doing, and I felt very good about that. And then you said, but it's not very strategic and it's not very coordinated. Now, in response to that, certainly in my life and many people here over the last few years, there's been a much greater sense of more strategy together, more coordination together. How do you see that helping in this context? What role can the churches play in this current situation?
No, it's a good question, Roger. And some of the things I was talking about, in the jargon of the world I inhabit, we'd call that social capital. We'd call that those networks, and there's 2 types of networks. There's the networks that kind of support people, the bonding networks where they are, and then there's the networks that connect people, the networks that connect people outside their own community. And one of the things we find, particularly in areas that have got more challenges and more disadvantages, they've got quite good bonding networks sometimes, not good enough, but what they haven't got is the bridging networks. They're not good, and they haven't got the support to connect to other communities. And I suppose that's really where I was getting to, which is, I think if I look at church faith communities in Surrey, I think we've got some remarkable examples of people responding to some of the needs that they see in their immediate neighbourhood, some of the needs they see in their communities, their families. But it's a question about how you can go beyond the kind of palliative support into the intervention that's going to change something, into the intervention that's going to mean that you're not going to be dragged into a cycle of responding to support that person as opposed to working with other communities with that individual to create mechanisms that enable them to change the circumstances they're in for the better so that they become more self-sustaining and they don't need to carry on relying upon the support of the faith communities, because that becomes unsustainable for all of us. And that's about the connectivity. We've had some really good examples of faith communities in Surrey who've put people in whose role is just to connect all the networks of support that are already in a place, just to bring them together, I suppose, to gather them in that sense, but to bring them together to an agreed purpose, to an agreed set of opportunities, to an agreed set of this is what we're going to focus on and this is how we're going to move this issue on for us all. And I think that kind of thinking around genuinely how do we change this situation so we're not just responding to the need, but we're changing it to prevent that need and to prevent future needs because we've already anticipated and moved to respond to them.
Okay. Somebody, as we came in, said to me, I'd like to ask David a question, and that was that they're running a very good homeless support service. They're providing beds for homeless people, but they feel as though they're being the council in the area is kind of like actively against them. It's quite a posh area. They really don't want these people around. They don't want the homes in their area. Could you give them some advice?
Yeah, I mean, there's two groups of people, aren't there? There's the NIMBYs that were, not in my backyard, and there's also the notes. Have you heard the notes? Not over there either. And so, the reality is that, and it's part of the previous answer, I think, which is I don't think it's unreasonable for people to be anxious about what the implications are of hostels opening, homeless people being brought into a community, ex-offenders. I think it's going back to the empathy, I think I can understand, and certainly local councils will understand, why is that community anxious about this? And this is a communication and engagement exercise. This is around helping councillors to work with their communities to reassure them when they've got fears and anxieties about the implications of change. Most of us, and with good reason, most of us are anxious about change. And the reason is because most changes we've experienced haven't made things better. And so people are anxious about change and they do need help. Local councillors are elected by those communities, so they've got that kind of dual role of both speaking on behalf of the community and helping the community to understand wider issues. And that's a difficult role for the elected representative. So my advice would always be to get the elected representatives on board and to have a real discussion with them around how this will work in terms of the community they've been elected to serve and how it works with wider roles. It's no different to we're busy building an eco-park in parts of Surrey because we create a lot of waste. At the moment, we ship all that out to Kent to be burnt, or we bury it in the ground. Neither of those are particularly good ways of responding to waste. So we're trying to recycle and deal with the waste that we create in our own community. Most of the county thinks that's a great idea. The people who are living near to the eco-park aren't quite as convinced. And that's part of a discussion, isn't it? So I think what I'd say is elected members are your best way in to having a discussion about how you engage effectively with local communities.
If there's one thing you'd say to us, what would it be?
One thing. Probably thank you, actually. I'm a genuine, as Roger said earlier, there's been some research done in the USA, and they found that in some parts of the USA, faith capital, the social connectivity provided by faith communities, is over half of the social capital that's available. So outward-looking faith communities that are supporting their local neighbourhoods, their families that are connecting, are absolutely a fundamental part of how we'll deal with the challenges that face us as a community. I don't really understand how we'll deal with the social policy issue around older adults without massive support from faith communities. So thank you, and please can you do some more of what you're doing?
Okay, thank you. And is there one thing we can pray for you for?
Well, there's two things, actually, and one's might seem silly to you. I'm a Liverpool Football Club supporter. and although they did very well at the weekend, I really do feel that some more divine inspiration wouldn't go amiss with them. I think the other thing is, just on a very personal level, and I didn't say this at the start, I'm not a churchgoer. The last time I was in a church was in August, and I was there because my mother had died, and I was there to attend her funeral and to speak at that funeral, which I found probably the hardest thing I've ever done. And I'm still in grief for the loss of my mother. It's affected me far more than I ever thought it would at the time, and I'm still in grief over that. So any prayers to help me through the grieving process, I'd be very grateful for. And obviously, somebody's already written to me from this group. I don't know who they are, but somebody's already written to me and said that they're from Surrey and they're going to pray for the county council. So I do thank you for that, and let's see if that's had any effect on what Mr. Osborne does to us this afternoon.
If you don't mind, can I close in prayer? Is that all right? Thank you. Father, we thank you for David, and we do pray your blessing on him in the future. We ask that you would be the God of comfort to him in his grief and upon the family. We pray for your overshadowing of your love around him. And we pray for great wisdom and insight and great help for him, Lord, as he leads this important council and as he influences others as well. We lift him into your hands. Thank you for enabling him to be here. We're very grateful in Jesus' name. Amen. Can you put your hands together, please, and give thank you, David.